My father beat my 6-year-old daughter. My mother and sister held me back and made me watch. My family hurt my child and expected me to stay silent. Instead, I took her to the hospital, pressed charges, and methodically dismantled their perfect lives, brick by gilded brick. Sophie, my daughter, is 8 now. She's a whirlwind of laughter, mismatched socks, and a fierce love for graphic novels. She's healthy, thriving, and thanks to the strange mercies of a child's mind, she doesn't recall much from that day 3 years ago. The doctors explained it as a form of memory suppression, a psychological armor her young brain deployed to protect her from the sharpest edges of the trauma. I am profoundly grateful for that mercy, even if I will never be granted the same peace. I will carry every second of that day with me forever, a ghost that walks at my side. Because context is the soil in which betrayal grows. Let me start from the very beginning. In the carefully curated ecosystem of my family, I was the wildflower pushing through the cracks in the pavement while my older sister, Isabel, was the prize-winning rose, meticulously cultivated in a greenhouse. My family has always operated on a golden child system, and Isabel was their crown jewel. She did everything right. She married Adrian Lauren, a corporate lawyer with a jawline as sharp as his legal arguments, had 2 beautiful children, Julian and Elena, and lived in a sprawling suburban home with a pristine lawn and a shimmering in-ground pool. Her life was a portrait of success, a constant affirmation of our parents' values. Meanwhile, at 24, I became a single mother. My ex-boyfriend, a man who had sworn he loved me under a canopy of summer stars, vanished the moment the second pink line appeared on the pregnancy test. He didn't just leave, he evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the lingering scent of his cologne on a pillow and a gaping hole where our future was supposed to be. For the next 6 years, my life was a frantic ballet of survival. I worked 2 jobs, one as a waitress smelling of coffee and burnt toast, the other stocking shelves in the dead of night at a grocery store, just to keep our tiny, drafty apartment. I earned my nursing degree through a gauntlet of night classes, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a desperate, burning resolve. I raised Sophie on a diet of microwave dinners, library books, and the unwavering belief that we were a team, a fortress of 2 against the world. My parents made their preference for Isabel's life over mine painfully obvious, not with a single, dramatic declaration, but with 1,000 little cuts that bled me dry over the years. For their birthdays, Isabel's children received hefty savings bonds and whispered promises of Ivy League futures. Sophie received $10 gift cards to Target and a perfunctory pat on the head. In the annual Christmas photos that adorned my parents' mantelpiece, Isabel's family was the radiant centerpiece, glowing under the soft lights. Sophie and I were always there, but positioned at the very edge of the frame, an afterthought almost out of focus. My mother, a woman who could weaponize a sigh, would groan with theatrical weariness whenever I mentioned my struggles with finding reliable childcare. "Well, Clara," she'd say, her voice dripping with disappointment, "these are the consequences of the choices you've made." Yet, she would drop everything, cancel appointments, and drive 45 minutes across town to babysit for Isabel at a moment's notice. For years, I persuaded myself that it didn't matter. Their approval was a currency I couldn't afford and didn't need. Sophie had me. I had her. We were a self-sufficient universe. But children, with their uncanny ability to see the truth we try to hide, notice things. Sophie began to ask questions that felt like tiny daggers to my heart. "Mommy, why does Grandma always hug Julian and Elena longer?" she'd ask, her small face clouded with confusion. "Why does Grandpa play catch with Lucas, but he never wants to build Legos with me?" I would plaster a bright, false smile on my face and make excuses, weaving flimsy narratives about them being tired or busy. I did it because, despite everything, I desperately wanted her to have a family beyond just me. I wanted her to feel the embrace of a larger tribe, even if that embrace was cold and reluctant. That July Sunday began like every other compulsory family gathering, an exercise in endurance disguised as a celebration. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and my father's bravado as he lorded over the barbecue, charring meat with the confidence of a king. My mother was flitting around the kitchen, obsessing over Isabel's potato salad, which she declared a culinary masterpiece, while ignoring the homemade cookies Sophie and I had baked. Adrian, my brother-in-law, was holding court on the patio, pontificating about rising interest rates to a captive audience of my father and a neighbor. The other kids were a shrieking, laughing whirlwind, racing through the sprinklers with a joy so pure and uninhibited it felt like it belonged to another world. Sophie was being perfect. At these gatherings, she always worked especially hard to be good, as if she believed she could earn their affection through flawless behavior. It was a heartbreaking performance. She shared her toys without a single complaint, even when Julian, her older cousin, snatched her favorite plastic unicorn from her hands. She used her manners immaculately, her pleases and thank yous as crisp and neat as the bows in her hair. She even complimented my mother on her floral dress, a gesture that earned her a brief, distracted pat on the head before my mother turned her attention back to Isabel. Then, the fragile peace of the afternoon shattered. The catalyst was something as trivial as a cupcake. Elena, who at 9 years old had already inherited Isabel's casual cruelty, decided she wanted Sophie's cupcake. Not her own, which sat untouched on her plate, but Sophie's specifically. It was a power play, plain and simple. Sophie, who I had taught to eat her savory food first, had been saving it, looking forward to the chocolatey reward. As Elena's hand darted across the table, Sophie instinctively pulled her plate back. "That's mine," Sophie said, her voice soft but firm. "You have your own." Elena's face, usually a mask of angelic innocence, flushed a deep, mottled red. She lunged for the plate again. Sophie held on tight. For a moment, it was a silent, tense tug-of-war. Then the plate tipped, sending the cupcake flying through the air in a slow-motion arc, landing with a splat right in the middle of Elena's pristine white sundress. The scream that erupted from Elena was biblical. It was a sound of pure, theatrical outrage, and it brought the adults running. Isabel was the first to arrive, scooping up Elena as if she'd been mauled by a bear. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her eyes locking onto Sophie with such venom that I instinctively moved between them, a human shield. "It was an accident," I said, my voice calm and steady, belying the frantic pounding of my heart. Elena tried to take Sophie's cupcake. "And now you're calling my daughter a liar?" Isabel spat, her voice as sharp as broken glass. Behind her, Elena, seizing the opportunity, wailed, "Your brat threw her food at me." "That's not what happened," I insisted, my own voice rising. "I was sitting right here. I saw the whole thing." My mother appeared at Isabel's side, her face a mask of disappointment. "For heaven's sake, Clara, can't you control your child for one afternoon? Look at Elena's dress. It's ruined." "It's frosting, Mom. It'll wash out," I said, turning to look for Sophie. She was frozen, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and horror, her uneaten sandwich forgotten on her plate. "Honey, why don't you go inside and wash your hands?" Before she could move, my father's voice boomed across the yard. "She's not going anywhere until she apologizes." He stomped over, his beer sloshing in his hand, his face set in the familiar scowl he reserved for me and my daughter. "Dad, she has nothing to apologize for. She was defending her own food." He jabbed a thick, sausage-like finger in my face, his breath sour with beer and smoke. "Don't you talk back to me. You've raised her with no discipline, no respect. She is going to apologize right now, or I'll teach her some manners myself." A cold, slithering dread coiled in the pit of my stomach. "You're not teaching her anything," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "We're leaving." I reached for Sophie's small hand, but in a flash, Isabel's fingers clamped around my wrist like a vice. "You always do this, Clara," she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "You can't just run away every time your kid acts up. She needs to learn there are consequences." "Let go of me," I snarled, wrenching my arm free. But in that split second of distraction, my father moved with a speed that was shocking for a man his size. He grabbed Sophie's upper arm, his thick fingers digging into her tender flesh. She yelped, a sharp, piercing sound of pain and surprise. "Dad, stop it," I cried, trying to pull Sophie away, but my mother grabbed my other arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Let him handle this, Clara," she hissed in my ear, her voice a venomous whisper. "You clearly can't." "Handle what? She's 6 years old," I screamed, struggling against my mother's hold. In the chaos, Isabel had moved behind me, pinning both of my arms back with the full force of her body. I was trapped, a prisoner held by my own family. My father began to drag Sophie towards the house. She was crying hysterically now, her small legs scrambling for purchase on the grass, her desperate pleas for me tearing through the air. I fought with everything I had, a wild, cornered animal, but my mother and sister were stronger together, a united front of cold, righteous fury. Across the patio, Adrian just stood there, his phone held up, not to call for help, but to record. The detached, clinical way he filmed the scene, as if it were a nature documentary, sent a fresh wave of horror through me. He was documenting it for his own protection, already building a case. "Your trashy little thing needs to learn some manners," my father grunted, his face contorted with rage. As they reached the back door, he fumbled with his belt buckle, the sound of leather unthreading from its loops slicing through the air. Pure, unadulterated terror flooded my system, cold and sharp. "No, Dad, please don't," I begged, my voice cracking. He raised the belt high above his head, the thick leather strap silhouetted against the bright summer sky. The first strike landed across Sophie's back with a sickening crack. She screamed, a sound of such agony that I felt something inside my chest snap, something fundamental and irreversible. The second strike hit the backs of her legs. She tried to curl into a ball on the ground, her small body convulsing, still crying out for me. Stop it! Stop it! I was kicking, biting, screaming, doing anything I could to break free, but their grip was like iron. My mother, incensed by my struggle, slapped me hard across the face, the sting bringing tears to my eyes. Be quiet, she seethed. You're just making it worse for her. The third strike landed. Then the fourth. Sophie's cries were growing weaker, dissolving into ragged, whimpering gasps. The fifth strike caught her across the shoulders. She went limp, collapsing onto the grass like a marionette with its strings cut. A few more strikes landed on her small, still form, and then she fell silent. Complete, terrifying silence. Good work, Dad. Isabel's voice, shockingly calm and full of admiration, cut through the sudden quiet. She released my arms as if this were just another Tuesday afternoon. Now maybe she'll think twice before she disrespects my kids. My parents and sister gathered together, a tight, self-congratulatory circle. My father was breathing heavily, a sheen of sweat on his forehead as he rebuckled his belt. My mother was already fussing over Isabel, smoothing her hair, muttering about how they would never let anyone harm her angels, how they knew how to raise children properly. Finally free, I stumbled forward, my entire body shaking so violently I could barely stand. Sophie was not moving. She was just lying on the grass, a broken doll in a tattered sundress, dark crimson stains blooming on the pale yellow fabric. My mother turned to me, her eyes as cold and hard as a winter sky. Pick her up and get out, she commanded, her voice devoid of any emotion. You've ruined this day. And don't you ever step foot in this house again. I moved on legs that felt disconnected from my body, each step a monumental effort. I knelt beside Sophie, my hands trembling as I gathered her into my arms. She was breathing, thank God, but in shallow, ragged little pants. Her eyes were closed, and a small cut was bleeding on her forehead from where she had fallen. I stood up, clutching my child to my chest, and I looked at each of them, burning their faces into my memory. My father, still smirking with a sick, self-satisfied pride. Isabel, already scrolling through her phone, utterly bored and indifferent. My mother, her face a mask of stone-cold, unyielding righteousness. Adrian, coolly sliding his phone back into his pocket. And on the porch, Elena, Julian, and Lucas, watching the entire spectacle with a detached curiosity, as if it were nothing more than a television show. I didn't say a word. There were no words left. I carried Sophie to my car, my movements stiff and robotic, carefully buckled her into her car seat, and drove away from that house of horrors, not to our apartment, but straight to St. Mary's Hospital. The moment the ER triage nurse saw Sophie, her professional calm evaporated. She took one look at my daughter's bruised and battered body and immediately called a code, summoning a full trauma team. Within minutes, we were swarmed by a whirlwind of doctors, nurses, pediatric specialists, and a social worker, their faces a mixture of focused urgency and barely concealed horror. They gently cut away her ruined dress, the sound of the shears slicing through the fabric echoing the tearing of my own sanity. A nurse, her hands steady but her eyes filled with tears, meticulously documented every single mark, every bruise, every angry red welt left by the belt. Someone counted 12 distinct impact sites. Another nurse photographed Sophie's injuries, her hands shaking so badly she had to retake several shots. She kept apologizing to me, over and over, as if capturing the evidence made her complicit in the act itself. I reached out and squeezed her shoulder, my voice a hoarse whisper. You're helping us. Every picture you take is another nail in his coffin. Dr. Helena Fisher, the attending physician, a woman who looked no older than 37 but carried the weary authority of someone who had seen the worst of humanity, gently guided me into the hallway as the team continued their assessment. Your daughter has sustained significant physical trauma, she stated, her voice devoid of platitudes. Beyond the obvious contusions and lacerations, I'm extremely concerned about internal injuries. She has a concussion from the impact to her head when she fell. We need to get a CT scanned immediately to rule out any bleeding or swelling in her brain. We're also running tests to check for kidney damage and internal bleeding from the blows to her torso. My knees gave out. The sterile white walls of the corridor swam before my eyes. Dr. Fisher caught my elbow, her grip firm and grounding, and guided me to a chair. I need you to be strong for her, she said, her tone not unkind, but firm. Sophie is going to need you to be her anchor through this. She needs to know you're here, fighting for her. Can you do that for me? I nodded, sucking in a shuddering breath, forcing oxygen into my burning lungs. Yes. Whatever she needs. Good. Now, I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anything like this ever happened before? Any previous injuries, any other episodes of extreme physical discipline from family members? The words tasted like ash in my mouth. My father, he's always had a temper. He could be rough. Sometimes he'd grab Sophie's arm too tight, or yell at her too aggressively. But he's never hit her before. I swear to you, if I had ever thought for a second that he was capable of this, I would never have let her near him. Dr. Fisher made notes on her tablet, her expression unreadable. The social worker will need that information. I am a mandated reporter. I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse to the authorities. But this goes far beyond suspicion. This is documented, photographed, and witnessed. The police will be getting involved, whether you want them to or not. A cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in the wreckage of my grief. I want them involved, I declared, my voice shaking but laced with a newfound steel. I want everyone involved. I want him arrested. I want them prosecuted. And I want the entire world to know what they did to my baby. Something shifted in Dr. Fisher's eyes, a flicker of respect, perhaps, or recognition of a mother's rage finally unleashed. Then we will make sure you have everything you need to make that happen. Sophie drifted back to consciousness as they were prepping her for the CT scan. She was disoriented and in pain, her small voice crying out for me. I held her hand the entire time, murmuring to her that she was safe now, that I had her, that no one would ever hurt her again. The social worker, a woman named Annalise Weber with kind, compassionate eyes that had clearly seen far too much, pulled me aside while the team took Sophie for her scan. I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the very beginning, she said gently. So I did. I recounted every single soul-crushing detail, every word, every moment. I described how I was held back by my own mother and sister while my father beat my 6-year-old daughter because she wouldn't give up her cupcake. Annalise listened without interruption, her expression growing grimmer with each sentence. We're calling the police, she said when I had finished. This constitutes aggravated child abuse. Your daughter has a concussion, multiple contusions, and potential internal bruising. She's being admitted to the pediatric ICU overnight for observation. An hour later, 2 detectives arrived. Their names were Amelia Novak and Daniel Petrovich. I told the story again, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. They took copious notes, examined the photographs of Sophie's injuries, and recorded my official statement. Did anyone else witness this? Detective Novak asked. My entire family watched, I answered, my voice hollow. My mother and my sister were holding me down. My brother-in-law, Adrian Lauren, he recorded part of it on his phone. Detective Novak's expression darkened. We're going to need that phone. Detective Petrovich leaned forward, his voice calm but insistent. Clara, I know this is difficult, but I need you to walk me through the timeline one more time. Every detail, no matter how small, could be crucial for the prosecution. Start from the moment you arrived at the house. And so I did it again. I described the cupcake, Elena's tantrum, Isabel's immediate, unquestioning defense of her daughter. I detailed my father's escalating threats, the moment his verbal abuse turned into physical violence. I explained how my mother and sister had forcibly restrained me, and how Adrian Lauren had stood there, filming it all like a spectator at a gladiator match. You said your mother slapped you, Detective Novak noted, flipping back a page in her notebook. That's assault. We'll be charging her with that as well. I don't care about me, I said, the words raw. I care about Sophie. What they did to me is nothing compared to the fact that they restrained me and forced me to watch him beat her until she was unconscious. We care about everything, Detective Petrovich corrected me gently. Every single charge we can make stick is another layer of armor for your daughter, another guarantee that these people will not be able to do this again. This brother-in-law, Adrian Lauren, he recorded this? He mumbled something about documenting the discipline. I recalled. I think he thought it would somehow protect them, prove that they were just correcting bad behavior. Novak and Petrovich exchanged a look that spoke volumes. People always think they're smarter than they are, Petrovich grumbled. That video is either going to exonerate them or convict them. And based on what you've told us, I'm betting heavily on the latter. They went to my parents' house that night. My father was arrested for felony criminal child abuse. My mother and Isabel were arrested for false imprisonment, assault, and for being accomplices to the abuse. Adrian Lauren, after being informed by the detectives that destroying evidence was a serious felony, turned over his phone. The footage was as damning as I had imagined. It was a clear, steady shot of a grown man viciously beating a small child while 2 women held back her screaming mother. All of it captured in high definition. In his initial statement, Adrian actually admitted that he had filmed it specifically to show that appropriate disciplinary action was taking place. He genuinely believed it would provide legal cover for them. Instead, it sealed their fate. The next morning, Detective Novak came back to the hospital to give me an update. She pulled a chair up to Sophie's bedside, her face etched with fatigue, but her eyes grimly satisfied. "We watched the video," she said, her voice low so as not to wake Sophie. "All of it. 52 seconds of footage that will haunt me for the rest of my career. Your father's lawyer is already trying to spin this as discipline that went too far, but the prosecutor isn't buying it for a second. We're pursuing the maximum charges." "What does that mean?" My voice was a shredded remnant of what it once was, ravaged by crying, rage, and exhaustion. Felonious child abuse resulting in serious bodily injury. If he's convicted, he's looking at a sentence of 6 to 14 years. Your mother and sister are being charged with felony child endangerment, assault, and false imprisonment for restraining you. Adrian is facing charges for false imprisonment and potential obstruction, depending on what else he did with that footage. She consulted her notes. "We're also looking into whether he uploaded or shared the video with anyone. If he sent it to other family members or tried to use it to justify what happened, he could be facing additional charges." Detective Novak then asked me some difficult questions about my family history. "Has your father ever been violent before? Any history of domestic incidents? A pattern of aggression?" I dredged up memories I had long tried to bury. He had disciplined us as children, of course, but never anything like what he did to Sophie. But he was always angry, always yelling. He threw things when he was mad, plates, tools, whatever was in his hand. He'd punched a hole in the wall once, when Isabel came home past curfew. He'd grabbed my wrist so hard it left bruises for a week when I was 16 and had talked back to him. "Did anyone ever report these incidents?" she asked. "No," I admitted. My mother was always the peacekeeper, always smoothing things over. She'd say he just had a temper, that he didn't really mean it, that he worked hard and deserved respect. Looking back, I realized she wasn't a peacekeeper, she was an enabler. She was protecting him, not us. Detective Novak scribbled furiously. "This pattern of behavior is crucial for our case. It establishes that this wasn't a one-time, isolated incident. This is who he is." While Sophie slept in her hospital bed, a tiny, bruised form lost in a sea of white sheets and beeping machines, I made the phone calls that would change everything. Arrests were just the beginning. I called my nursing supervisor and told her I was taking an indefinite family leave. I called my landlord and informed him I would be breaking my lease and moving. And then I called Beatrix Marlowe, a lawyer whose name was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in victim advocacy circles. I had spent an hour researching attorneys on my phone, sitting by Sophie's bedside. I needed someone merciless. Beatrix's name kept coming up. She had successfully sued an entire school district for failing to protect a bullied student. She had bankrupted a daycare chain whose employees had covered up injuries. She didn't just win cases. She annihilated those who harmed children. Her consultation fee was more money than I had in my bank account, but I was ready to max out every credit card I had. Beatrix met me at the hospital the next morning. She watched the video Adrian had taken, her face a mask of professional composure, but I saw her knuckles turn white as the fifth strike landed. "I'm taking your case pro bono," she announced, her voice crisp and decisive. "And I am going to make sure they pay for this in every conceivable way." Beatrix was in her early 60s, with a mane of silver hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that could probably make seasoned judges squirm. She exuded an aura of formidable intelligence and righteous fury.
Pro bono?
I repeated, certain I had misheard. "But your fees are waived. Along with everything else," she said, setting her ancient leather briefcase on the small table in Sophie's room. "I run a very profitable practice, Clara. I take cases like yours when they matter, and I don't charge for them because money is not the point here. Justice is the point. What matters is that your daughter is safe, and that the people who did this to her learned that they chose the wrong family to victimize." The relief that washed over me was so overwhelming it almost brought me to my knees. "Thank you," I sobbed. "Don't thank me yet. What comes next will not be easy," Beatrix warned, clicking her pen. "The criminal case is proceeding, which is excellent. But I am going to file a civil suit that will strip them of everything they own. Your parents, your sister, and her husband. We are going after all of their assets, their homes, their cars, their retirement accounts. By the time I'm done with them, they will wish the criminal charges were the worst thing that happened to them." She began sketching out a plan on her legal pad. "We can sue while the criminal trial is ongoing. The criminal case establishes guilt and assigns prison time. The civil suit establishes financial liability and compensation for damages. We will use the criminal conviction to bolster our civil case, but we don't need to wait for it." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Tell me about their financial situation." I gave her everything I knew. My parents' paid-off house, worth nearly $500,000. My father's 401k. Isabel and Adrienne's comfortable life, financed by his substantial salary as a corporate lawyer, private schools, luxury cars, a country club membership. Even people with assets have something to lose, Beatrix murmured, a grim smile playing on her lips. This week, I will file for a restraining order to keep them away from you and Sophie. Then, we filed a civil suit, assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent supervision. Negligent supervision? Your sister and brother-in-law allowed their own children to witness a brutal assault. They exposed them to profound trauma. That is legally actionable. I will also be making a call to Child Protective Services to recommend they evaluate Isabel's fitness as a parent. The thought of Isabel, so perfect and judgmental, being subjected to the same scrutiny she had always avoided, brought a spark of dark, satisfying pleasure. For the week that Sophie remained in the hospital, Beatrix unleashed a legal firestorm. The restraining order was granted immediately. The judge, after reviewing the medical records and the photographs of Sophie's injuries, issued a 6-year order, stating in his ruling that anyone who beats a 6-year-old child unconscious has forfeited their right to family contact. The civil suit was filed. The complaint to Child Protective Services was made. During that week, my phone began to ring with calls from unknown numbers. I ignored them until a voicemail came through from my Aunt Monica, my mother's sister. Clara, honey, it's Aunt Monica. I just heard what happened, and I am absolutely horrified. Your mother called me from jail asking for help with bail, and when she told me why she was there, I hung up on her. I want you to know, I am 100% on your side. If you need anything, money, a place to stay, someone to watch Sophie, you call me. What they did is unforgivable. Other family members followed, cousins and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years, all calling to offer support and express their disgust. It seemed my father's temper and my mother's enabling behavior were fault lines that had been running through the family for decades, and this final, monstrous act had caused a seismic rupture. The news of Adrienne's arrest spread like wildfire through his legal community. His prestigious law firm, citing a morality clause in his contract, fired him. His income dropped to zero overnight. Isabel's carefully constructed social world began to crumble. The country club revoked her membership. The PTA at her children's school asked her to step down. In a fit of narcissistic rage, she posted a long, rambling tirade on Facebook about being persecuted, which only served to fan the flames. People began sharing news articles about the arrests in the comments. She started receiving death threats. The criminal trial was expedited, a rare occurrence for felony cases, largely due to the irrefutable nature of the video evidence. My father pleaded not guilty, his lawyer arguing that he was merely administering traditional discipline to an unruly child. The prosecutor, a formidable woman named Katerina Vogel, systematically dismantled that defense. The defendant is not the child's parent, Vogel declared in her opening statement. He is the grandfather. He has no legal right to discipline this child. And even if he did, 12 strikes with a leather belt, hard enough to cause a concussion, serious bodily injury, and render a child unconscious, is not discipline. It is assault. It is a crime. When they played the video for the jury, a wave of audible gasps and sobs swept through the courtroom. 2 jurors wiped away tears. I testified on the 3rd day. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a bitter, vindictive daughter with a long-standing grudge against my family. Isn't it true, he asked, that you've been looking for a reason to cut them out of your life? No, I replied, my voice clear and steady. I kept bringing my daughter to their home, hoping that one day they would learn to love her the way grandparents should. I gave them chance after chance to be kind to her. They chose cruelty instead. But I admit, I was hurt by their favoritism. What I do not admit is that I am exaggerating what happened. The video doesn't lie, Mr. Schumann. You've seen it. Everyone in this room has seen it. My father beat my 6-year-old daughter unconscious, while my mother and sister held me down. That happened. No amount of insinuation about my supposed motives can change that fact. The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. Guilty. On all counts. My father was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. My mother and Isabel each received 20 months for their roles. Adrienne was given a 9-month sentence and a substantial fine for false imprisonment. The judge, a stern man named Heinrich Keller, was scathing in his sentencing remarks. Mr. Bauer, he said, looking down at my father over his spectacles, what distinguishes your crime is the sheer brutality of your attack and your absolute lack of remorse. You have shown no accountability, no understanding of the profound harm you have caused. You blamed a 6-year-old child for your own violent actions. That tells me you are precisely the kind of person who belongs in prison. He was equally harsh with my mother and Isabel. You too claimed you were trying to de-escalate the situation, the judge said, his voice dripping with contempt. But the evidence shows you were active, willing participants. Mrs. Bauer, you struck your own daughter as she begged you to stop her father from brutalizing her child. Ms. Lauren, you praised the assault. You celebrated it. That level of callousness towards your own niece is incomprehensible. Prison time was a start, but it wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the same loss that I had felt. Beatrix was a master of financial warfare. By the time the civil trial began, my family had already exhausted most of their savings on legal fees. Here's what we're asking for, Beatrix laid out in our strategy meeting. Medical expenses for Sophie, past, present, and future. That includes her hospitalization, ongoing therapy, and any specialists she may need down the road. We're estimating $220,000 in medical costs over the next 12 years. Then, we ask for pain and suffering. Lost wages for you, both past and prospective. Emotional distress. And finally, punitive damages to punish them for their outrageous conduct. We are asking for $2.5 million. The figure was staggering. They don't have that kind of money, I breathed. No, Beatrix agreed. But they have assets we can seize. Your parents' house, their retirement funds, Isabel and Adrienne's home, their cars, his 401k, her inheritance from your grandmother. We will take everything we can, and if they can't pay it all, we will garnish their wages for the rest of their lives. The civil trial was a formality. The criminal convictions had already done most of the work for us. The defense argued that we were being greedy, that we were trying to financially ruin them out of spite. In her closing argument, Beatrix was magnificent. They destroyed themselves, she thundered, her voice ringing through the courtroom. My client is simply collecting the bill for the damages they caused. They made a choice to beat a child. They made a choice to enable and celebrate that beating. They chose to put their own fragile egos above the safety of a little girl. Now, they must pay for those choices. That isn't spite. That is justice. The jury awarded us $900,000. It was enough to bankrupt them. My parents were forced to sell the house I grew up in. They lost everything. The house, my father's 401k, my mother's IRA. They moved into a cramped, rundown apartment in a bad part of town. Isabel and Adrienne's home went into foreclosure. Adrienne's 401k was liquidated. Isabel's inheritance was seized. They were left with nothing but a mountain of debt that would follow them for the rest of their days. Their marriage, already strained, shattered under the financial pressure. They divorced 9 months after the trial. I took the settlement money, and Sophie and I moved 3 hours away. We started over. New city, new house, new school, new life. Sophie thrived. The nightmares became less frequent. She made friends. She joined the soccer team. She learned to play the piano. 2 years later, my mother called me from a blocked number. Her voice was thin and reedy, a ghost of the formidable woman she used to be. Clara, please. We have to talk. Your father gets out in 2 years. We have nothing. Isabel's marriage is over. Her children barely speak to her. Can't we find a way to move past this? I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, empty coldness. You held me down while your husband beat my daughter unconscious. You told me to pick her up and leave. You chose Isabel over the safety of your own grandchild. There is no moving past that. But is she all right now? She asked, a desperate edge to her voice. Children are so resilient. Sophie has scars on her back that will never fade, I said, my voice as cold as ice. She has nightmares where she's reaching for me, but she can't get to me because you and Isabel are holding me back. She flinches every time a man raises his voice. But yes, she is alive. She is healing, which is more than any of you deserve. But we're your family, she whispered. You stopped being my family the moment you decided that hurting a 6-year-old was acceptable, I said, letting the words hang in the air between us. Sophie is my family. You are just people who happen to share my DNA. Lose my number. I hung up and blocked the number. Life is quiet now. Sophie is happy. We have a small house with a big backyard and a vegetable garden, just like the one my mother had ripped out all those years ago. Sometimes, people who hear our story ask if I regret how hard I went after my family, if I ever feel guilty for taking everything from them. The answer is always the same. Not for 1 second. They showed me who they were. They chose cruelty over compassion, image over integrity. They hurt my child and expected me to quietly accept it. Instead, I made sure they understood that actions have consequences.
Réel, permanent, dévastating conséquences.
Every day, they wake up in the ruins of the lives they destroyed. And every day, Sophie and I build something beautiful from the ashes. We have peace. We have safety. We have each other. And that, in the end, is the only justice that truly matters.